So, hello everyone. We are now going to start with the second run of our LIBER webinar series on research data management. And this is actually also a second run of a presentation which was delivered in December by our today's speaker, Carol Tenopir. And first of all, I'd like to thank the LibreOffice. Friedel in the background is supporting us during the webinar. And in addition, we have Rob Grimm, who's helping with running this webinar. The two of us are co-chairs of a working group in the steering committee, Scholarly Communication and Research Infrastructures. And we will continue this type of webinars during this year, and as you might have seen, there's already a second announcement, but we'll keep you updated on this. So today we will have about 45 minutes for this webinar, and we start with a short introduction, and then basically I hand over to our speaker. She will speak about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we have a question and answers session where you can, of course, during the webinar, and as you might noted, this is a webinar which will be recorded. You can use the chat anytime to put your questions, and my colleague Rob will collect these questions, and also, I will try to do this as well, and then we come back to the questions later on. So our speaker, Carol Tenopir, as you will likely know, she's a professor at the University of Tennessee and currently a visiting professor at the Hanken School of Economics in Helsinki. And she speaks to us about a study which was commissioned by LIBER in collaboration with DataONE. And she will tell us about research data services in European libraries. And so Carol.
Okay, thank you. I'm pleased to be here with everyone again for this second webinar, and I just want to thank this team that I've worked with at LIBER. It's been a real pleasure this year working with this group, and the interest in the webinars, I think, is a reflection of all that we've been hearing about research data services in the last couple of years, and many of you are involved or starting to be involved, and I think that shows what an important topic this is. And things that I have been hearing, and I'm sure you have been as well, is the idea that good research data management is really needed to help ensure reproducibility and transparency of scientific research, to help preserve data now and into the future, to enable reuse and reanalysis of data and data sets, and to advance scientific knowledge. And of course, these are all the important reasons, but in addition, there's also reasons why we're all interested in research data services, and that is that growing number of governments, funding agencies, and publishers around the world are now making requirements to make data resulting from research openly available, to develop data management plans, and to have good data services. And so as a result of all of this, there's this need and growing need and recognition that research data is an essential part of the scholarly record. But nobody's really sure exactly about the best place or the best procedures to make this make good research data services happen. So I would say to you, and I think one of the reasons that this team is so interested in this is that because academic libraries have that traditional role in preserving and providing access to the scholarly record in many forms, it's not surprising that research data management and preservation is a global issue for academic libraries. And so I'm going to talk about the survey that we've done. As was mentioned, this is sponsored by LIBER, commissioned by LIBER, and was also a part of the National Science Foundation, the US LIBER-DataONE project that I've been involved with, and included a team, an international research team of folks who are very much involved and interested. So this builds on some earlier LIBER-DataONE surveys, and these are both available if you'd like to find the earlier surveys of North American research, well, not just research libraries, academic libraries in North America. We did 2010 and then again in 2014 of US and Canadian members of the Association of College and Research Libraries. And these surveys found that there was a lot of interest in research data management services, but we found that comparing between 10 and 14, that not as many libraries who had planned to offer services had actually begun to offer them. And so we did follow-up interviews and revealed some reasons that may be things that resonate with you as well, that the libraries found that starting up new kinds of services were more complex than they thought at the beginning. They had staffing issues and found that they needed to deal with staffing, with getting staff up to speed on various kinds of services, and just trying to make decisions about where to begin. And the recognition that they couldn't do it alone, and so needed to collaborate, and collaboration takes time. So going into that context, we found we were thinking that we might find some things similar in Europe, but that European funding institutions were actually ahead of the US funding and Canadian funding institutions in having mandates for open data. So we thought we would perhaps find more libraries involved in research data services. The survey was sent out last year. It was the survey of academic library members of LIBER. There are 333, or were at the time, academic library members of LIBER. And they're split. We looked at the open air categories for regional geographic distribution, and this is the split of the members. Our responses, we got 119 responding libraries, and they were a pretty good match for the geographic distribution. We had slightly smaller representation in the south, slightly larger representation in the north, but overall we had a pretty good representation. I want to talk to you about some of the key findings today briefly, and let you know that the full report's available through LIBER, plus we also have kind of a detailed look at the report that's going to be published in LIBER Quarterly very soon. Just finished the final edits on that, so you can look for those for details. But I wanted to highlight three things today. The first of those is an examination of the range and types of research data services that are now offered or planned to be offered within the next 2 years by European academic research libraries. The second is just a real brief look at some of the regional differences. There are a few, not a lot, but some regional differences. And then look at that important issue of staff skill development. So the first finding, to look at the range of services. And I think if there's one key takeaway from this survey and this study and this webinar today, is that research data services are not a single service. Not every library has to offer the same suite of services. They don't have to all look alike, and that there are many, many different services. So we asked libraries about over a dozen discrete research data services and found that there was quite a range being offered today or planned to be offered in the future. And each one of you at each of your libraries make up a suite of services that makes sense for you. So the ones that were most offered are here. 77% of the libraries that responded to our survey say that they're involved in active discussions with others at their universities, at their institutions, and other institutions about research data services. And another 2/3 are involved in active policy development and planning. I think this is important because it shows we're at a very early stage in developing research data services, but it's important that libraries are taking a leadership role in these discussions and are a place to kind of center the discussions about what needs to be offered. It does show that many libraries are still in those planning stages, and so I think it's important to look at the results in a minute of what are they planning to do within the next 2 years. About half of the libraries that responded say they are training their colleagues on research data services, and as we found in the North American studies, this is one of the issues, that training and skill development that's crucial to a variety of services. In another question that I don't have here, we found that under half of the libraries currently have policies related to research data services. So this kind of these top 3 services discussing, setting policies, and working on skill development and training of colleagues lead to this idea of what kinds of policies do we need to have in the future. We found that slightly under half of the libraries say that they are providing a service that helps consultation on data management plans using some of the good data management planning toolkits that have been developed in the last couple of years. About 44% say they are offering consulting services about metadata standards or providing data, and then another 43% are doing outreach and collaboration services. I think what is important about these top services that are being offered now is that they all fall into what I would call the consultative kind of category of services. That is, they are those that are informational. They inform a client or a group about things as a need for policies, how to find information on data management plans, standards, data citation practices, all of these kinds of things. But they're not actually the hands-on of creating a repository, for example. They are the things that are helping your constituents learn more about research data services, practices, policies, and procedures. The next most commonly offered services are the first place where we've got what I'd call the technical services suite of services or type of services being offered. The first technical services to appear in our list was 38% of the responding libraries said they provide technical support, some kind of technical support for research data services. In a separate question, we asked those who provide technical support, what kind of technical support do you offer? And the most frequent response there was data storage services. And then after that, we go back to consultative services, reference support, web guides, and then just under a third say they provide direct participation with researchers. That is, work on a research team as a research data management expert. The next technical service comes up with identifying data sets for deposit into a repository. This is a little complicated to look at, but it's just taking all of the services of the consultative type services along the bottom from the most frequently offered to the least frequently, and then the blue is what I just showed you. That is the percent of library respondents who are currently offering that service. So you'll see the first one, discussing research data services with others. Those are the 77%, that blue section, that is offering them now. What's new here is we also asked, what are you planning to offer within the next 2 years, and then what do you have no plans to offer? So the next group, the green, is the plans to be offered in 2 years. If we did this survey again 2 years from now, we should expect all of that green to be blue. That's what we expected in the North American survey, and it didn't happen quite that fast, but these at least are the plans that are being made. So you can see a majority of our respondents are either offering or are planning to offer almost all of these consultative type services. The one on the end, which is the exception or has the least number of plan to offer, is that direct participation with researchers, the one-on-one consultation and participation with a research group, which of course has a big implication for staffing and a commitment for staff that many perhaps are not able to offer. The next chart shows I've just taken the technical services, again with those that are offered the most to the least, and shown those that are planning. So you saw providing technical support for RDS. That was in the currently offered, 38% are currently offered. Another 42% say they plan to offer technical support within the next 2 years. Identifying data sets for deposit into data repositories is the next group. Preparing data, actually doing the preparation for deposit themselves rather than just identifying data is the next. Creating and transforming metadata is next, and then the last, the deaccessioning of data. And again, with the exception of the last, a slightly smaller majority, but a majority of respondents to our survey say they have plans to offer technical services, although fewer are offering them currently. The deaccessioning of data is probably just too early to think about taking data out of a repository when we don't have the data into the repository yet, so not surprising, and a majority are not planning or even thinking about deaccessioning data or eliminating data. So let me go on to the regional differences. And as I mentioned, there were some regional differences, although not in everything. We found that libraries in the North region and the West region say they are more likely to be currently training colleagues on RDS, developing training programs. They are more likely to be discussing research data services with others. And compared to the other regions, they are doing more collaboration with others. So the discussion and the collaboration perhaps go hand in hand, as does the training, working as a group to leverage their information about RDS and their expertise and providing collaborative services. And they say they're more actively involved in policy development and strategic planning. I should also say that direct participation in a research project is not very typically offered in any region, as you saw, but it is more common in the West and North region. Libraries in the South and West region say they are more active in consulting with academic staff or students about data management plans and about metadata standards. They are more likely to be identifying data sets for deposit in repositories. And by the way, when these libraries are helping identify data sets for deposit, they could be depositing in their own data repository, but they also could be helping academic researchers deposit data in subject repositories or in national or governmental repositories. So it's not necessarily depositing, it doesn't mean that they necessarily have their own repository. It maybe they're just helping identify and helping them get them into other repositories. The South and West libraries are more likely also to be creating or transforming data sets and metadata. And again, it is a minority still of the libraries that are offering it. They're just slightly more likely to in the South or West. Okay, let me talk now about developing staff skills, because I think that's an important motivation for many people to be involved in these kinds of webinars, is how do we get staff skills developed and talk to you about some of the strategies for staff skill development that were mentioned by the libraries that responded. We asked a series of questions, or several questions, that had to do with strategies for staff skills development. And one strategy is to hire new staff who already have the needed skills. This, of course, puts a lot of pressure in a good way on those of us who are involved in library and information science education. The programs that have been developed with specialties in research data management are really been developed over just the last couple years, so they're fairly new programs, and they're, the number of graduates from these programs are limited, and they are regional. They tend to be regionally based. They're more graduate programs or professional programs that are providing research data services in some areas than others. So hiring staff with research data services could be a problem finding the staff. And then also, of course, you have to have a position to hire them into. So when we asked, have you hired new staff, we found that just a bit over a third, 38.8 or 39% said yes, they had hired new staff in the last 12 months. A majority have not, but a fair chunk have hired new staff to deal specifically with some type of research data service. More common, far more common, is providing opportunities for current staff to develop research data skills. And we found that 84% of the respondents said that this is the tactic that they're using in terms of developing RDS. It's certainly something that means that organizations like LIBER have an important role in providing workshops, webinars, seminars, and other kinds of skill development for current staff, because this is by far the most common need for developing RDS. Another related efforts in Europe, and my colleagues on this call can tell you more about them, but things like FOSTER, you may be aware of the FOSTER program that is actively involved in training. And the University of Edinburgh has quite a bit of training as well as other organizations. The development opportunities take a lot of forms. Specifically, when you have staff development, when you send staff for training or develop your current staff, what specifically are you doing? The most common answer was supporting staff to attend conferences and workshops, and again, LIBER is a very active participant in providing conferences and workshops. The support for staff to take courses related to RDS is also offered by 60% of these libraries. And I'll talk specifically in a minute about some opportunities for that. Support for staff to join working groups, and again, LIBER has a working group on research data services, and this is an important way to talk to others who are involved in research data services and form collaborations. A smaller number provide in-house staff workshops, and again, this is something that might be done in a collaborative way. When we talked about collaborating with others outside the library community to develop skills, that's a much smaller percent. So it's really the library community, the library professional community, the organizations that are being turned to the most for developing RDS services. We had some open-ended questions about your strategies. We wanted to go into a bit more detail of what kinds of strategies were being developed and being used and what worked for skill development of staff. And some of the typical responses are here. Several mentioned they collaborated with another institution to develop skills-based MOOC. And I mentioned University of Edinburgh, the EDINA Research Data Management Training in collaboration with the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Cradle Project has a massive open online course that that you might be interested in. A new one started in December, but they start these courses fairly regularly, and it's an intense skills-based course on research data services. Another tactic for skill development is some mentioned that they moved staff from another support unit, for example, for technical services, specifically into research data services to develop those technical support services to try to get things going. Sometimes those are permanent moves. It's a reassigning of priorities, which is important, and sometimes it's a non-permanent or a startup move. And this goes along with the hiring of staff. Sometimes folks said that they hire non-permanent staff to get things started. So they might hire a consultant or experts to help their staff get geared up to get research data services started, and then and to train the staff. One tactic is to hire people who can train the staff and get things started that way. Another tactic is to reset priorities, and of course whenever a new service gets offered in the library, it's really a time to reset priorities, and this came up over and over again in our open-ended questions, that we're offering something new, we don't have a budget to hire a lot of new staff, therefore we have to rethink our old things and what we're doing. If we're going to get into research data services as we think we should, we need to refocus, and we need to refocus staff. Some mentioned the idea of finding one person in the library who is particularly excited about the opportunity of learning something new, or particularly motivated by the importance of research data services, and refocusing their role. For one example was an engineering librarian who had the academics that he worked with were asking about research data services, were getting funding from agencies that required the deposit of research data, that wanted to know about it. So he was motivated by his clients, by his academics that he was working with, to learn more about it, and refocused his role from collection development into research data services development. And then a last strategy that I hope doesn't describe you is someone said that their strategy for skills development was to dramatically increase the workload of some poor individual librarian. Perhaps reality, but I hope they said it with a bit of a smile on their face too. Let me end with, before our question period, with some another specific example of the kinds of tools that are available to help you get started in research data education, and mention that again, that librarians don't have to learn all of these things on their own. There are a variety of subject repositories and research data initiatives around the world that are helping to develop educational tools. I already mentioned Edinburgh and University of North Carolina MOOC, workshops from Lieber and Foster. The other partner in this survey was DataONE, and if you go to dataone.org, you'll find a suite of tools for RDS education. These tools are aimed both at librarians to learn the basics of research data services, but they're also made for librarians to use in instructional sessions with their researchers and students at their universities. The idea, rather than having to develop materials yourself, here's a suite of materials that can be adapted, used. They're open source, they can be changed to fit your context. The examples can be changed to make sense in your country or your university, and you can use these to start the process of helping to train others in what is research data management, for example. These are a series of PowerPoint modules. They include exercises. They've been tested. They've been used many times at professional conferences as well as individual organizations. I should mention that the DataONE's focus is on earth and environmental sciences, so these modules are about scientific research data services, earth and environmental services focused. So if you're interested in digital humanities, for example, they don't have things there, but they can be adapted for any kind of science related research data services. There are currently 11 modules. Several of them are quite introductory. Why should researchers be interested in data management? Why data management is important? Some things about data sharing, data management planning, and you can see the others there. I should mention these are developed in the U.S., so the legal and policy issues are U.S. centric. These are things that you would want to adapt for your particular environment. But the certainly the early modules and the way they're developed and tested, and the idea of using exercises to support the examples, I think are really make these very useful, and I think that they're things that can be easily adapted into your environment. So those are just several examples. The DataONE example, LIBER as an example, and Foster and Edinburgh are all examples of good ways to develop training. From the results of our survey, we realized that the big issue now is collaboration, training, skill development, making a plan, and deciding which sets of services, what suite of services make the most sense for you, what you're going to do on your own, and what you're going to do with collaborators in your region or in your area. So I want to thank again this team. This has been a great team to work with. I mentioned it includes both DataONE and LIBER folks from around the world, and I've been pleased to work with them. As was mentioned at the beginning, I'm based this year in Europe. I'm at Hong Kong School of Economics in Helsinki, and so it's been nice to be able to work so closely with the European research libraries. Let me stop there because we want to have some time for question and answer, and I will turn it over to Rob and Birgit to field the questions. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you, Carol. It was very interesting to listen to your views on this, and also to be a little bit involved in the study. Yeah, and now the floor is to the participants. I mean, if you have any questions, please put them into the chat. And I've seen Lawrence already asked for if the data of the survey is available, and as you can see, it's posted in Zenodo as as data you can use on your own for looking into the results of the survey. As we wait for some questions, I'd like to ask you, Carol, are there any additional recommendations you would give to European libraries? I mean, I wonder, I mean, for example, we have a workshop next week, which is together with infrastructure providers. Isn't that also some step which has to be taken at some point? And I wonder how far you are in the US with, I mean, this conversation between libraries and strengthening the role, promoting the role of the libraries towards the infrastructure providers. In terms of, we have seen libraries are the unit which is providing the consultancy services, and often not necessarily the technical services as well.
Yeah, and so this is interesting, because when we did the first survey on this, lots of libraries expected that they would be creating their own repository, just like they have a repository for articles or for course materials. The expectation is that they would be providing data repositories. And one of the reasons why it didn't go as fast as possible is data repositories require a huge infrastructural commitment. And depending on the kind of data sets can be huge. I mean, data sets go all the way from a small data set like our like a survey data set, which is very easy to manage, very easy to load. You know, that's the easy side, all the way up to very, very large data collected by sensors, for example. You know, these are huge data sets. So it is more complicated than folks thought at first. So this is where the infrastructure, some have decided is let's to collaboratively create the data repositories at perhaps the major research university in our country, or perhaps it's a government organization, or perhaps it's a subject-based repository, and the library can provide the kind of consultative services to that, as well as support your collaborators or your colleagues who may be taking on that role. So that's one kind of structure. The other is, it doesn't infrastructure doesn't have to mean everybody does nothing or does just a full-blown data repository.
Like
so
with giving IDs to data sets, I mean, which is using the infrastructure, of course, and you need someone.
Infrastructure is absolutely right. Preparing data for deposit and actually doing the deposit in another repository, giving IDs to data set, creating a metadata repository at your institution, making that part of your existing repository perhaps. So you have the metadata of all of the data that is created at your institution with a link to the data repository where it's located. So the infrastructure is like a spectrum, I guess I would say, and that was a lesson that the libraries have been learning together, I think. It isn't all or nothing, so don't despair.
There was a question from the audience, whether the data is available for reuse.
Oh, we had this before.
Yes, and the link is there.
I mentioned it already.
Yeah, if you look at the Q&A, the link is there. That's, of course, one of the things we have to, we have to follow. If we're encouraging other people to share data, we certainly have to share the data. So the data is available. The paper is forthcoming in LIBER Quarterly. I think I mentioned that, and there will be a link to the data set in that paper.
Of course, we cite the data. Yeah.
The U.S. data is the first data set. We didn't have human subjects permission to put it up. The second one we did. We are trying to get that permission retrospectively to make the first one available. So I think that all of those data sets will be made available. If not, we can always share data sets individually.
Yeah. Carol, do you think that the collaboration between, for example, initiatives like DataONE and the LIBER and maybe other organizations should be intensified in this area on research data management?
Absolutely. I think research data management's an issue that's important to all disciplines and internationally, and I think these kind of collaborations are really helpful. Something like earth and environmental science data, that's something that everybody needs to be involved with the curation and the education about. So I really look forward to continued collaborations. That reminds me of something else. It's not exactly what you asked, but let me pose my own question. Well, we'll give folks another couple of minutes to ask a question. I've been asked to give a presentation at the University of Eastern Finland next month, and it's to university administrators on kind of why open science, what's important about open science, including open data as well as open access. And one of the things preparing for that, and one of the things I was thinking about, is a lot of times with researchers, with libraries, we talk about how do you make the infrastructure available? How do you help them find the place to put their data? How do you help them with finding tools for creating data management plans? And but what's kind of missing is the motivational aspect of why they care. And so that's what I'm talking about there. Is libraries have this role too to kind of educate of why it's important. Libraries have done that with open access and just beginning to do that with open data. Not as an evangelist, because there are some very good reasons why data should be preserved but not made immediately open. Mm-hmm. So we need to make sure that we create the infrastructure and the climate that also allows preservation with some restrictions on use. based on sensitive data or other concerns. But this idea of why should you care and listening to people about what kinds of environment you need to have, I think is an important role for libraries. So I'm talking about why should you care both from the mandate, the carrot and stick approach. The stick is because your funding agency says you have to, or your publisher says you have to if you want to publish this article, but also the why should you care in terms of not just the
interests, yeah.
benefit to society, but the increase in access to your research and reproducibility of science.
Right. There's
finding your own stuff after a couple of years, right?
Yes, exactly right. So the preservation aspect, it isn't just sharing, it isn't all about sharing. First time we did a survey of scientists, we got this feedback of what sharing, that sounds like I'm giving and I'm not getting. So what do you get from making your data, putting it in a repository? You get access to your own data in the future after your computer crashes and everything else. Yeah.
There's another question from Timo Borst coming in. Reads, apart from a range in infrastructural research data services, are there also community-specific services, community-driven differences in research data services?
There's differences in discipline, for sure. So depends on how you're defining community here, and if I'm misinterpreting this, jump in here. But if I define community in a couple different ways. First, if I define community as discipline, what's needed in different subject disciplines is going to be different. So those disciplines in sciences which are heavily driven by funding, medical sciences as well as natural sciences, engineering, they rely a lot on external funding, and many of those funders require open data and require good data management. So that's one kind of community, big difference. Humanities, not so driven by funding, and there really aren't obligations there to share, plus data is a completely different issue. With social science disciplines, sometimes the big difference is if you're dealing with, or medical, if you're dealing with human subjects, you may have sensitive data that you really can't make completely open, as I mentioned before. So that's another big difference. So being aware of those kinds of issues and being sensitive to those issues is an important role for the library. The other kind of definition of community would be community by type of library or size of library. And in the LIBER study, we only looked at research libraries, but in the North American studies, we looked at all sizes of academic libraries, and of course there are huge differences in terms of the kinds of services offered between the very small libraries or the teaching focused or the professional degree focused and the large research libraries. The large research libraries are for sure the leaders in research data services. And that, again, that doesn't mean that the small ones can't offer something. They can offer links to services perhaps that the larger ones offer, or they can offer more reference type services.
Right. Thank you, Carol, for this answer. Another interesting question from the audience that comes up is, what can libraries do to encourage or guarantee the reuse of the data they gather or cure?
Well, there are no guarantees, of course, and sometimes our preservation role, of course, is preserving for a future that we won't see. So preserving data into the future is sometimes you take it on faith. Reusing data in some fields, of course, is something that needs to be done a lot. So that the first thing is to have good metadata standards, of course, is to follow a standard of metadata, have good description so that people know what the data is. The other is to publicize the data set. So make it searchable, if you have a repository, if you have even if it's just metadata, you make that crawlable with good links, with data that has been given a unique identifier. Those are all things that help make data findable, which is the first part of reusable. Standards for data creation make the data more usable. And then links to tools are the other thing. So a data repository like DataONE, a large part of what they do is link their data sets to tools for reuse. So good description, good findability, those are all things that libraries know how to do. It just needs to be transported into the data context.
Yeah. Well, following up on the metadata, Eva Mendes from the audience says but the metadata need to be interoperable among disciplines. So I assume she refers to the fact that the metadata is not yet interoperable. So how should that proceed? How should that evolve?
And I suspect Eva knows more about this than I do, in the sense that I know about it from looking at all of the different standards, but not being there having to implement the different standards. When our current scientist survey is out right now, by the way, if any of the researchers at your university get a survey from DataONE, encourage them to answer it. But one of the questions we ask is, what metadata standards do you use? And I suspect this is the third in a series of surveys. The first two, the number one answer was none, and I suspect that many of them, when they said none, didn't even know what it was. The next most common answer was whatever my lab uses. Not really sure what it was. And then the long tail. And when is standard not a standard? When there are hundreds of choices, and this is the issue we are with metadata for sure. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So good description within a subject discipline is a lot easier than in interdisciplinary fields, for sure.
Right. And from your experience, you'll see some libraries building confidence in building RDM services. Are there also, from your experience, libraries who are looking at RDM and say, okay, this is building on the experience we have so far. This should be not a topic we want to become active in the future because of what we learned so far. It's too difficult, or it's too complicated to manage, etc. So
yeah, so that's yes, and certainly in the smaller libraries, that's kind of what they came to. My answer to that is somebody's going to have to do it in the university. And the library, this is a great time for the library to get involved and to be a leader in this issue. It's going to bypass you if you don't. You do not have to have a huge staff. You don't have to do all of these services. It may just be that you are the library, somebody who's really interested in it, is a member on a team, an interdepartmental team at the university to see if it's important at your university. So a team that includes IT, the Office of Research, the library, some subject departments where research data is important. It may be that the library's role is just having a seat at that table. It may be that at some of the universities they're not ready. The university isn't involved, but anybody that gets external funding or is research active
will come to you anyway, right?
Yeah, in the EU for sure. Yeah, if you're in the EU, you're going to have to be interested. But the level of interest, as I say, may just be a seat at the table, being involved in the discussions, helping people know that libraries are talking about this. And library, for example, you don't have to develop your own research data management planning toolkit. There are things that are already involved in just letting people know about those. So I would say, yeah, it may be hard. Find one person who's interested in it.
Yeah, okay. And I think it would also in the future be very interesting to survey the projects in the EU about their practices in terms of what they put into the data management plans. I mean, you could of course do it based on the actual documents they deliver because it's a deliverable at some point, but it's hard work, so a survey is certainly
they actually do what they're saying to do, isn't it?
Yeah, to really find out more.
Yeah, that's true too.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe time for the last question.
Yeah, if there's anyone who would like to. So I don't see anyone start to type, so I think we can wrap up for today, and I'm happy if anyone comes up with a suggestion to us on what topic we should cover in one of our next webinars. We would be really pleased to hear from you. So don't hesitate to come up with
Birgit,
an idea.
before you
Hmm?
before you sign off, do you want to
Yeah.
give any plugs or any information about upcoming
Yes, of
seminars
course.
or
I mean,
webinars
this was just an additional
for LIBER
remark.
or
I
for
mean,
FOSSA?
we'll have a webinar on the
Yeah.
23rd of February with Michael Witt and I can't remember her name. I'm not good. Say Simmons is her second. What's her name?
Yeah, Michael
What was
Witt.
the name?
We have a webinar on 23 things, 23 library things
Yes,
for
that's
RDM
what I'm
with
saying.
Michael Witt and the staff from ANS, the Australian National Data Services. And we
Just
have more
try to dig out her name. Sorry for that. Natasha Simmons from ANS.
Yes.
And
Natasha
yeah.
Simmons.
So we would be glad if you consider joining, of course. And yeah, the recording will of course be made available online, and I suppose that Friedel will also come up with a blog post summarizing the questions and answers. Yeah, and one last piece of information, as Foster has been mentioned a couple of times, this, by the way, we will have an extension of the project starting sometime this spring. So there will be more to come from Foster, but of course from LIBER. So next LIBER conference is of course an opportunity to join a workshop, but in between we will have more webinars. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you all for today.